Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the SENV webinar, Best Practices for Plastic Recycling in a Circular Economy Using European Standards. My name is Andrea Nam, and I work for SENV. I'm project manager responsible for environment-related projects, including also circular economy. I will be your host today, and here in the studio are my invited guests who will be your speakers today, and I will invite them to introduce themselves. Werner, please.
Good afternoon, Andrea. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Werner Bosmans. I'm coordinating plastics in the European Commission and the Director General on the Environment.
Thank you. Rainer, please.
Yeah, my name is Rainer Mantel. I'm from SENV TC249, and I wish you a good afternoon.
Jens, please.
Good afternoon, Andrea. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jens Giegerich. I work for the Joint Technical Committee 10 on material efficiency of energy-related products. And there I'm convening the working group on recyclability and recycled content.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before we start with the webinar, I would like to explain to you some practical questions. The webinar will last about 30 minutes and will be followed the questions and answers session about 10 minutes. The webinar is recorded and will be made available after this live webinar ends. We would like to make this webinar interactive, so you're encouraged to ask questions. You can ask questions via the orange Ask a Question button that you find at the bottom right corner of the webinar screen. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. So let's move now to the topic of today. The challenges linked to the plastics production, use, and end of life can be turned into an opportunity for the EU and the competitive advantage of the European industry. The webinar of today aims at exploring how and which European standards could help in finding the best solutions for plastics recycling. Before we talk about the standards, I would like to ask Werner to explain very briefly the European policy framework on plastics and the policy objectives regarding the recycling.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. If you allow me, I'll show a couple of quick slides. So when we're talking about plastics, we know plastics is used everywhere, and you see this one graph where you can see it is really used in many different sectors, and it is very indicative of the importance of plastics in our economy and in our society. So plastic is extremely useful. However, and that we all know as well, we are producing or having more than 27 million tons of plastic waste every year in Europe. Only a bit more than 30% is collected for recycling, and that is not even all recycled then. And then maybe the most important problem, there's a lot of leakage in the environment. We all have seen the images on the internet of what happens with plastics in the oceans. And so we need to tackle that as well, because up to 500,000 tons of plastics enter the oceans just coming from Europe alone already. So this is not yet circular plastics. So to tackle those problems, the European Commission has issued a European strategy for plastics in the circular economy. Now you see here on the slide, we have 4 chapters in that strategy. And the first 2 ones are our main objectives. We have objectives on the economics and quality of plastics recycling. But reuse, repairability, and so on from products remain the first objectives before recycling. And aside, of course, we need to tackle plastic pollution. The 2 other ones are cross-cutting objectives that help us to obtain the main objectives. So one is about investment and innovation, and the other one is, of course, about how do we trigger global action. Let me now explain a little bit more in detail about recycling, which is the core subject of today. Our main political target we're having in the plastic strategy is to make all plastic packaging reusable or recyclable by 2030 in an economical, viable way. And for that, plastic strategy foresees quite a lot of actions along the value chain, along the life cycle. So the first one, and we always have to start with that, is to stimulate design. Design for circularity. One of the main things that we're doing that, again on packaging, which is the key sector in plastics, but we are tackling the other sectors as well. In packaging, we have the packaging and packaging waste directive. Within there, you have essential requirements which tell you when and how plastic packaging can be put on the market, and those requirements, we will make them much stronger to take into account of this design effects. The next step after plastics and plastic products have been used is collection. We need to put everything into place to have a better separate waste collection. And for that, we have updated our waste legislation. And as a next step, to close the circle, we need to use recycled plastics back in new products. And for that, we have set up a whole kind of policies, but the main one is probably this. In the plastic strategy, we have set an aim, a goal of 10 million tons of recycled plastics in new products by 2025. That's quite an ambitious aim. Now, to reach that aim, we have asked businesses to help, and we have set up, together with them, the Circular Plastics Alliance. In the meanwhile, this alliance has been signed already by more than 170 organizations, and there are a lot of working groups working all over to make this help, to reach this goal on recycled content, and of course, working all along the value chain, the life cycle, to set up actions to do that.
This all sounds very challenging, Werner, but how do you see the added value of standards in delivering the policy objectives?
Well, I think it's relatively straightforward for me. First of all, the environment policies set up the what. What do we want to achieve? And then you have the standards, and they're supporting the policies with the how. How can we achieve it? We have, for instance, again, as I said on packaging, we have the essential requirements. Harmonized standards can help to guide economic operators there. So then they know when they comply with the rules, and then they can be granted presumption of conformity. It, of course, helps to do that in a harmonized way, to organize a level playing field, and so in the end, to do the proper implementation. We have another example, which is on the single-use plastics. Single-use plastics, there's a directive to help to battle marine litter. In there, we have amended for a standard on attached caps. So the caps remains attached to the bottle. We have presented that mandate to SEN. And this will help economic operators with a common methodology that will save costs and easy implementation. So altogether, we really hope that SEN, together with businesses, can help us to achieve and support the objectives of the plastic strategy.
Thank you, Werner. Obviously, we have a lot to do in the very near future. So let's see what is SEN already doing and SENELEC concerning the plastics recycling. So SEN has a specific dedicated technical committee on plastics. So I would like to ask Rainer, what is this technical committee in charge of, and how are environmental aspects addressed in this committee?
Yeah, well, the Technical Committee 249 Plastics is in charge for the standardization of plastics. And this means for thermoplastics and thermosets, also bio-based polymers and degradable plastics, thermoplastic elastomers, composites, and of course also recyclates. Rubber is excluded in general. So there are 15 working groups, or more than 15 working groups, working on own documents, standards, technical specifications and reports. And they are in close cooperation with ISO, with the TC61 plastics, with respect to adoption of international standards, if in line with European requirements, for instance, the European environmental guidelines. The experts are coming from the plastics industry, from producers, converters, and of course from recyclers, as well from laboratories, certification bodies, NGOs, or universities and authorities. So the environmental aspects are addressed in a particular working group 24, environmental aspects. A rather new team established almost 2 years ago. Today with around about 40 experts from more than 10 different countries. The scope is the strategic aspects and the coordination of all standardization activities in plastics and environmental aspects. And here the focus is on bio-based plastics and biodegradability, carbon and environmental footprint, circular economy, resource efficiency, also microplastics and plastics in the environment, and last but not least, recycling and waste management. The task is to coordinate and monitor all 10 TC249 activities dealing with environmental aspects, to liaise with the ISO TC61, the subcommittee 14, environmental aspects, and also with SENV, the strategic advisory body on environment. Last but not least, to serve as a platform to dialogue with all external bodies.
It's important to know that the European standards on plastics put so much emphasis already on environmental aspects. Could you also explain how this technical committee contributes to the delivery of the plastic strategy and more specifically to the recycling of plastics?
Yeah, well, since quite some time, CEN249 has a working group 11 plastics recycling in place. We've developed a whole set of standards, technical reports and technical specifications which support the circularity of plastics. So the first thing is the characterization of plastic waste. There is a standard EN15347 available, which provides all necessary information to characterize your waste. Then users and producers need to know the origin of recyclates. A standard EN15343 specifies the procedures needed for the traceability of the recyclates and also serves as a basis for the calculation of the recycled content. Sample preparation and procedures for testing plastics is very important. Two technical specifications, 16010 and 16011, describe the sample preparation and procedures for testing plastic waste and recyclates. Yeah, and finally, recyclates are put back on the market. For more than 90% of all thermoplastics, standards are available to define the characteristics to be measured for recyclates. There are some new developments on the way. One is, for instance, standard controlled loop, recycling of post-consumer PVC windows and doors. A further one is the determination of solid contaminants in recyclates, and there is one standard under development which defines the vocabulary which is used for environmental aspects.
The technical committee on plastics works under the construction sector at SEN. So, but we know that the plastic issues have a horizontal aspect. So how is the technical committee addressing plastic in a horizontal, in cross-sectorial way? And are there any other technical committees dealing with plastics recycling related issues? Could you reply to this, Ray?
Yeah, of course, there are other TCs in CEN being involved in plastic recycling related issues. For instance, we have the technical committee TC261 packaging, the TC155 plastics piping systems, the newly created TC462, which covers regulated chemicals in products, and also the horizontal SENV Joint Technical Committee 10, which focus on recyclability of energy-related products. So the TC 249 is in close cooperation via that newly created Working Group 24 environmental aspects, and they give the input by the experts on environmental aspects of plastics, and I would say plastics-related issues are well coordinated.
Werner mentioned a bit earlier the Circular Plastics Alliance. And SEN and SENELEC signed the Circular Plastics Alliance declaration. What would their role be, the SEN-SENELEC's role be in this alliance?
Yeah, as Werner mentioned already, the target of the CPA is to close the gap between the currently used quantity of recyclates for the production of new plastic goods in Europe today, and the targeted volume of 10 million tons until 2025, given by the plastics strategy. So the role of SENELEC here is to support the implementation of the key measures developed by the CPA with existing standards, of course, and also to develop new standards if requested. Yeah, SEN and SENELEC are currently investigating the need and the extent to coordinate input to the CPA.
Thank you very much. The European Commission requested SEN and SENELEC to develop material efficiency aspects for ecodesign. Jens, what should be accomplished with these standards, and what is the intention of these standards?
Okay, in 2015, the Circular Economy Action Plan has been published by the European Commission, and after that, the European Commission issued a standardization request towards SEN and SENELEC to cover the topic of material efficiency in energy-related products. At the core of this mandate, there are three very easy principles. For one, to extend a product's lifetime. The second principle is to have the ability to reuse components and recycle materials at end-of-life products, and also to use already reused components and recycled materials in new energy-related products. So in order to foster these principles and use the standards that are currently being developed in potential future eco-design legislation, whatever will be developed has to be measurable. So the Joint Technical Committee 10, which covers this mandate, developed metrics on different material efficiency aspects. For example, the durability of an energy-related product, the repairability, but also the recyclability of an energy-related product. Right now, these standards are horizontal in nature, so they are not product specific. However, they should be seen as some sort of horizontal guideline, how product-specific technical committees can, in the next step, write their own product-specific standards based on the work that has already been done.
We know that the eco-design is for energy-related products. Jens, are these standards limited to energy-related products?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the standards as they are right now are only aimed at energy-related products. However, the principles, the metrics that have been developed are of course adaptable to non-energy related products. One example of this would be the annex of EN 45557, which covers the recycled material content of energy related products. There we have an annex in there which covers different materials, so plastics, metals, float glass, and of course this part can easily be adapted to non-energy related products.
Very clear. And now that the material efficiency standards are published or close to publication, what will be the next steps?
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing ends, another thing begins. So the point of this whole horizontal standardization topic was to provide some basic material, some baseline for product-specific technical committees to work on their documents for their specific products. And this is already starting actually for Senelec TC59X, which is covering the performance of household and similar electrical appliances, founded a new working group covering material efficiency. They had their kickoff on the 6th of December and are currently expecting a standardization request by the Commission on material efficiency aspects, for example, on washing machines. Another example I would like to mention actually is SENV TC109. They are in the process of setting up a new working group which will cover material efficiency for gas appliances.
And more concretely, how do these standards support the recycling of plastics?
Okay, then we have developed 2 documents in the Joint Technical Committee 10, which are targeting the topic of recycling and what comes after that, recyclates. So for once, we have EN45555 on the recyclability of energy-related products. There we target the real end-of-life treatment processes happening, and we assume the actual efficiencies of treatment steps that are actually carried out in reality. And what this standard does is, in the end, it can provide you with an information on a percentage of materials that can potentially be recycled. And the second document I would like to mention on that is 45557, which covers, as I already mentioned, the recycled material content of energy-related products. And this might aid in the future in an increased uptake, especially of plastic recyclates.
Thank you, Jens, for this very exhaustive explanation. Jens and Rainer, can I ask you whether you have any specific advice to the users of standards related to plastics recycling?
Rainer, allow me to go first on this. So as I just mentioned, plastics recycling is covered in EN45555. However, in the next step, when these documents are translated in a product-specific way, the expertise of Technical Committee 249 experts, especially on plastics, is very welcomed. So we would really like your aid on that.
Rainer, could you elaborate this a bit further?
Yeah, capacities for the production of recyclates are available, but quantities used for the production of new plastic goods are too low, and the biggest challenges are here the quality. The quality with respect to level and consistency, as well as security of supply. And yeah, my advice here is consistent use and application of the existing standards for defining the quality of the recyclates. And that will lead at the end of the day in an increase in acceptance of recyclates in new products.
Yeah, thank you. I still have another question to the both of you. How could the increased uptake of recyclates addressed in standards? Maybe Jens, you can start.
Before we start on the increased uptake, I want to point out that the scope of the Joint Technical Committee 10 is much broader than just recycling and recyclates. While recycling and after that the uptake of recyclates is certainly important, we shouldn't forget about the waste hierarchy at this point, where it is stated that waste prevention is paramount. And one way to prevent waste is to prolong the lifetime of products. And this is covered in 2 different documents, EN45552 on the durability of energy-related products and EN45554 on the repairability of energy-related products.
Rainer, can you add something to this, or would you like to add
Yes,
something
of
to
course. Apart from consistent use of existing standards to improve the quality, additional standards should address the recycling-friendly design and also collection and sorting processes. I see in future standardization activities which could address the revision of standards that include, for instance, limitation of the use of recycled materials. We should focus further on quality criteria and test methods for recyclates and perhaps defining minimum qualities of recyclates, at least with respect to hygienic contaminants or physical properties. The development of additional standards to support design of products made from recycled materials is on the scope. And and last but not least, and that is in the medium term, we are going to face volumes, recyclates coming from chemical recycling. And here we need to prepare the ground. We need, for instance, a mass balance approach and definitions how to calculate recyclates.
Yeah, it's very clear we have still a lot to do here. Werner, I still have some questions to you. So you heard that standard writers are already working a lot related to recycling of plastics. Would the minimum use of recyclates be specified by law? And what do you advise to the standardization community to focus on in the future?
Okay, well, I think we already mentioned, all of us, that we have this objective of 10 million tons by 2025, as we stated in a plastic strategy. And in there, there's written that if, after analysis, we would see that progress is insufficient, then at a certain moment, the Commission will take additional steps, and that will not exclude regulatory action. Now, however, for the moment, we are looking at the voluntary approach, again, as already explained by the Circular Plastics Alliance. Now, beside that, we are already starting to include it in some pieces of law. The most important one is the directive on single-use plastics. There, we have added a target of 25% of recycled content for PET beverage bottles by 2025 and 30% by 2030 for all beverage bottles. Now, in the process of updating our legislation, we are looking at recycled content as well on packaging, on end-of-life vehicles, on construction products, on electronics, and on the ecodesign directives. And I would just advise the standardization community to look at all this, and we are really begging you for help on all these kind of issues, Andrea.
I see we still have some minutes left, so you allow me a last question?
Of course.
So what new policies are needed or expected that could be supported by standards, Werner?
Well, I think at this moment in time, we of course need to talk about the Green Deal. The Green Deal that the Commission just published, and that is the first priority of our new President, Mrs. von der Leyen. This is really our new growth strategy, the strategy that's good for the economy, for people's health and quality of life, with no one left behind. It's a roadmap that can make and that should make our economy sustainable, and that can turn these climate and environmental challenges into opportunities across all policy areas. Now, this Green Deal has as well a 3-page list, a long list of actions, key actions that we are now working out for the coming 2 years. Yeah. Specifically on plastics, we are stating things like follow up for the plastic strategy, work on microplastics, for instance, on textiles and tires, again, making this policy target that all packaging in the EU market is reusable or recyclable, to put that in legislation. We want to develop a framework for biodegradable and bio-based plastics, where we see uses for them, but in a certain context. And of course, we need to develop much further the measures on single-use plastics. And I would again make this plea that the Standardization Committee, but all of you, that we need all your support that you can give us to achieve circular plastics, and not just that, but really to achieve the Green Deal so that we can all go to a more sustainable world.
Thank you, Werner. I hope we will achieve all these targets as well as we achieve the target of the 30 minutes today. So now we move to the question and answers section. We already received a couple of questions, so if speakers are ready, I just read up the first one. It's to Mr. Bosmans. Why is the Commission work program for standardization 2020? There's not action on waste framework directive and on packaging directive? Question mark. It's Amanda who wrote in Fuso Nerini. It's very difficult to read. So I don't know if the question clear to you.
Okay. On the Waste Framework Directive, I think many of the actions there are then going further to sub-directives, if I can say it like that. And so one of the points is there on the packaging and packaging waste directive. And I think I explained it already a little bit. We are now working very hard on the essential requirements. We have a lot of studies running. I don't know how many stakeholder working groups, and we want to update the essential requirements. Once we have that, we might, most probably, will go to an updated legislation. We will propose that. We need to negotiate with Parliament, with Council, and once that's done, and this is really becoming new legislation, then we will turn to you, Andrea, for the standardization.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to add something? No, I think not really. So let's move to the next question then. So any standardization is planned on requirements for different levels of recyclates?
I think that's a question for you, right?
Yeah. So far, there are no projects in the pipeline, but it is under discussion if minimum qualities or standards for minimum qualities for certain applications could make sense.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Then let's move to the next question, which is directed to you, actually, to Mr. Manta. The published standards of TC 249 are mentioned in the EU law, giving presumption of conformity to the European requirements.
Oh.
Are they harmonized standards?
Oh, I'm afraid I think I didn't get the question right.
Are these standards of TC 249 harmonized standards published in the official journal?
Yes, of course. Sorry. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I reformulated a bit the question. So it's another one for Werner.
Yeah.
Would a biodegradable plastic, which at the end of the life is disposed for compostability, fit the circular economy frame?
As I just said, biodegradable plastics is on our work program for next year and maybe after, to see what we really want to do on biodegradation in plastics. Now, it's clear when something biodegrades, you cannot reuse the material, and the value of the materials is lost, which is, of course, our first objective of a circular economy. In that way, it is not bringing anything addition. However, there will be most probably applications where biodegradability is very useful. For instance, for certain things that you cannot recover, where you really want to use plastics in the environment, and it is very difficult to cover it. An example I'm often giving is a little protection around a tree in the forest in the mountains, that you put a protection so to let the tree grow. It will be difficult to recover that. There might be some other uses in agriculture, horticulture. We've put this all in a very big study that we asked to our chief scientific advisors, and we hope they come up with a very good advice around summer, after summer, so that we can take the necessary policy action afterwards.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to this?
Fine.
There is another question on that related a bit more to standardization, but could be also policy. What is the definition of energy-related products? Who would like to take this question?
Yeah, but I can give it a shot. Energy-related products, strictly speaking, are these products that are regulated under ecodesign, because that's where the name came from, actually. And I think you can explain it in a way that those are products that have either an impact on the energy use, or the biggest environmental impact actually of the product is from the energy use in the use phase. So that as a very broad try on the definition.
Thank you. let's move to the next. Oh, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would
Okay,
like
yes?
maybe to add on that. Of course, as Jens is completely right, but maybe to add something why we have this. Because at the beginning, we really wanted to do something on energy and greenhouse gases. And that was our first step in tackling environmental impacts of those kind of products. And now afterwards, on these products, we have looked to other impacts that they might have, and we're adding that upon then on the criteria that to which those products need to answer. And that's why we always talk about it, the directive on energy-related products. Now, within the next years, we will look if we can do something about other things as well, but that's still under discussion.
Thank you very much. Now a question related to standards. Is there any standard or draft available about recyclability terminology on plastic packaging that defines when a packaging could be considered recyclable or not? I don't know if you could reply to questions related to packaging or.
Yeah, I think not within TC 249, if it would make sense to have that in TC 261. And to be honest, to my knowledge, I'm not aware about such a standard.
Yeah, thank you. Now there's a question to Jens. With the announcement of the European Green Deal, could you please explain how the Joint EC10 standards contribute to the circular economy?
Of course, material efficiency as such is one way to tackle the topic of circular economy by making products that last longer, that are used longer, and once they are not used anymore, we can either harvest the components from them and use them for new products, or harvest the materials out of these products and use them for new products. So this covers basically everything from the design of the product up to the closing the loop part when we are trying to use the recyclates for new products. So it's very much in line with the Green Deal, although we started to work earlier, so we were first.
And again, a question on standards. In which technical committee, well, regulation, it says, so maybe not only related to standards, will mass balance definition and requirements for chemical recycling be defined? Is anyone ready to take the question?
If it's in which regulation, I think there are two different issues. One is about recycled content just in general, and that is in some parts of legislation. How it will be measured is then another thing. And we are now about to launch a big project on that to measure, maybe through mass balance approaches, recycled content. And that could be through mechanical recycling, that could be through chemical recycling. We're going to look at that. The first place where we really need to use this is in our legislation on the directive on single-use plastics.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe from the point of view of Joint TC10. Currently in the recyclability document, we haven't considered chemical recycling as such, but we are aware that we will have to do this in the future, so we are keeping this for the revision of the documents to add this.
Yeah, thank you. Next question. Now it's again to the SEN and the Commission with a slash. So does the Commission or SEN foresee different qualities of recyclates of a specific polymer? Products have specific material requirements. Are, for example, PP recyclates from different PP types suitable for reuse?
I can maybe first answer from a policy perspective. There are obviously different plastics, many different kinds of recyclates, so we need to recognize that. How we're going to do that effectively in legislation, that we're still looking upon. So what we will need then further on is methods to look at that, criteria to do that, and so how that producers need to comply with that. And then for those kind of things, we will look to the standardization organizations and SENELEC to make that happen, to help us with technically how can we make that all to work. It's a bit a general response, but that's the state where we are now.
do you want to add something to this?
No, I think there's nothing to add for the time being.
Also for Joint Technical Committee 10, we haven't covered the physical aspects of recyclates, so we haven't covered that at all.
I have to be conscious of time, so I just take one last question. Does SENV EC10 develop standards in relation to single use of plastic directive?
For the time being, not, because it had been addressed, of course, to the TC261 packaging in the first instance. So that means for the time being, we have no activities with respect to implementation of the SUP directive.
Thank you very much. I think this is the end. We have to come to the end of this webinar. We exceeded already the foreseen 10 minutes for the questions and answers. And thank you very much for the questions. We received a lot of questions, and the ones that have not been replied right now, it will be answered and it will be uploaded to our website, and you will be notified as soon as this is available. And we would like to kindly invite you to complete a very short survey, 3 questions, at the very end of this webinar before you quit. It will pop up at the end of the webinar before you leave. So I would like to thank you, the speakers, for their contribution today. And of course, thank you very much for listening. And I would like to invite you to keep checking our website for future webinars. Goodbye and have a nice day.
Goodbye.
Very much.
Bye.